Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Hello and good afternoon, all. Here we go. Let's get everybody in. Today is part 3 in my new series that I've been running this week called Explaining China. And today I want to talk about what's going on in Hong Kong, but also to give you an explanation of why it's happening right now and what the role of the Chinese government and their strategy is here. So just to recap very quickly the previous 2 episodes, and if you haven't seen them, I'm going to do a thread and I'm going to link all the videos, or you can just go back on Periscope and watch number 1, number 2, and this will be number 3. The first one, we talked about the history of Hong Kong, the history of Taiwan, the situation involved with North Korea. Yesterday, we talked about why China is cracking down, what their strategy was, and the situation that's leading them to do that. Today, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the crackdown of the Chinese students, but also explain what Xi Jinping specifically is doing. Yeah, Xi Jinping is specifically doing here and how this is leading. So, and what are the implications of it? So we're going to talk about the implications of the strategy here. And so first of all, they are starting to round up the Chinese, the leaders of the protests. You're seeing the videos now. For those of you who understand or have been following the series, you know that this is exactly what I predicted would happen. I have some tweets up as well talking about how, and I mentioned a little bit in part 2, about how if they are classified as terrorists, then unfortunately what you're going to have happen is the Chinese government will begin ordering the Hong Kong police force special duties unit, so the Hong Kong SDU, to use counterterrorism and anti-terrorism strategies against the protesters. So we're talking about soft tactics that were trained to the Hong Kong police forces, their elite unit, sort of almost like a SWAT unit, but more like special forces that were trained by British SAS and US Navy SEALs, US military special forces. So those tactics and the technologies, of course, were, again, trained to them from us. This is what we train them to do. So someone just said, can I add you via Snapchat? No, I do not have Snapchat. Why? Because I'm an adult. So I don't have TikTok either because I'm not a Chinese agent. So what we're going to see moving forward here is, and I talked about this yesterday, how China is doing this for the benefit of their domestic audience. But I also want to point out something that they're doing as well. And this is an understandable for those of you who are students of Chinese history to understand what Yihetuan means. Yihetuan. And I mentioned that in the title of that, Yihetuan. And so what does Yihetuan mean? It is the Council on Righteousness and Harmony. Yihetuan. Oh yeah, you guys got it there. So, or the Group of Righteousness and Harmony. But what the English translation of that is the Boxer Rebellion. So if you look up the history of the Boxer Rebellion, you'll understand what this was. The Boxer Rebellion was fanned by the flames of which were fanned by the Qing dynasty at the very end of the Qing dynasty, following their defeat in the Opium Wars, and then the forced signing of treaty concessions with the West. Primarily it was the British, but of course the French were involved. The U.S. played a small role. Keep in mind, we're talking about the 1890s here, so the U.S. had not really attained its global dominance. World War I hasn't happened yet. World War II hasn't even been thought of yet. Until you see, really, it's the British, the French, the Russians, and then also the Germans, and also the Japanese. The Japanese are kind of part of this as well. So the Boxer Rebellion was an anti-foreigner campaign, and very specifically, anti-Christian campaign. So when the Boxer Rebellion started, it was not only, and they call it Boxer Rebellion, by the way, because of martial arts. So it was because of martial arts. So, you could really sort of call it the Kung Fu Rebellion. Probably would be more understandable if you called it the Kung Fu Rebellion. But I guess they didn't have that phrase back then, or they didn't use that phrase in English, so they called them boxers because that was pugilism was the more a known term for, or at least the known sport. So Kung Fu hadn't even been understood yet in the West, and so they called them boxers. But it's actually the Kung Fu Rebellion. And there was this belief, by the way, believe it or not, that because the boxers would use, they're called Xiao Fei Hong now, someone says. And so because they had the power of Kung Fu, that it would defend them from bombs, bullets, guns, and cannons that were used by the imperialist forces. Keep in mind, this is Japan after the Meiji Restoration, and of course, this is the Western powers after the Industrial Revolution has really kicked off. So you've got industrialized militaries from the West. You've got industrialized military from Japan that learned it from the West. They're working together to impose their will on China. And by the way, we're not getting into judgments here. Should they have done this? Should they have responded, etc. I'm just telling a story, all right? Just telling a story. Happened a long time before I was born, you know what I'm saying? So the Boxer Rebellion, or the Kung Fu Rebellion, if you want to get your mind wrapped around it. Obviously, by the way, just to point out, no, they did not have the historic or the spiritual power to defeat bombs, bullets, and cannons, just because they were very good at Kung Fu. So there's that. What they did was they targeted the Christians, not only Christian missionaries, but Christian converts. They targeted Christian converts because they saw Christianity as a foreign, evil religion and as a tool of the imperialist foreigners to weaken China. Now, of course, I don't think any Europeans or Americans would view Christianity as an attempt to weaken China, but instead view it as a way to liberate China from a spiritual level. So they called Christian missionaries, so the boxers called Christian missionaries the primary devils, and they called converts the secondary devils. And so missionaries were killed, and convert villages that have been converted to Christianity, were attacked by the boxers. This got all the way up to the point where even some foreign officials were being attacked and killed by the boxers. And now the Chinese government at the time was the Qing dynasty. This is key to understand, because this is the Qing dynasty after they've been weakened and after they've been defeated and laid low by the Western powers. At this point, the Qing dynasty is on the verge of collapse, and they know there's a massive anti-foreigner, anti-Western sentiment, and anti-Japanese as well. So the Qing dynasty provides covert support to the boxers. They know they can't provide overt support, because if they did, then the foreign powers would say you've broken the treaty, and then they would move in. So they provided covert support to them, and this is through Yihetuan, and it's ultra nationalism, but it's also xenophobia, and it's anti-Christian. So it's anti-Christian in the sense that Christians were targeted because they saw Christianity as a symbol of the West. They saw Christianity as a symbol of imperialism. They were killing Christians left and right. They were essentially embarking on a campaign of genocide against Christians. Because that happened, they provoked a response, which is referred to as the Eight Nation Army. The Eight Nation Army then came in and, how to put this, pacified Beijing. There was, definitely imposed military will on the city of Beijing, on the capital, and to protect the Christians that were being slaughtered by the boxers. So that, again, I'm generalizing here, really trying to generalize. So why is Yihetuan ultranationalism being stoked by Xi Jinping now? Well, there's a reason for that. It's because in the same way that the Qing dynasty was at the end of its dynastic cycle, right? And we talked in the first one about the theory of dynastic cycles in China. Because Xi Jinping knows that the CCP is getting to the end of their dynastic cycle. So yes, they're circling the wagons. They're doing everything they can to crack down on Hong Kong. They're trying as much as they can to encircle Taiwan, to put pressure there. And they know, by the way, that their soft power, keep in mind, they've been using soft power diplomacy for 20 years now. This debt trap diplomacy that they've been using throughout Latin America, South America, Africa. They've been using debt trap. They've been using 5G diplomacy in Western Europe. That's all coming to a halt. That's all coming to a halt, and it's collapsing in their faces. And this is a huge problem for the CCP, because what's the Chinese economy entirely based on? It's exports. It's an export economy. Their entire economy is based on this, and they've got debt at 150% GDP, right? But the only reason that they can continue going on the way they do is, number one, because they have a communist command control system. They still do to an extent, even though it's state-run enterprises instead of the Great Leap Forward these days. But as long as they keep exporting, and as long as the U.S. keeps sending them money, and the rest of their trading partners keep sending them money, and as long as Iran keeps sending them oil, they're Iran's number one customer in terms of energy, they are able to keep it going. And then so they continue to, because they have the cash reserves to do so, they continue to spend and spend and spend inside the country, even though many of the buildings, you have these empty skyscrapers. So you have these empty skyscraper cities. They call them empty cities in China, or ghost cities, because it's literally just inflated. Think Keynesian economics, or what do they call it today? Magical monetary theory or whatever. It's the same thing. It's MMT and Keynesian economics are basically the same thing. So they can't keep the con going much longer, because they know, and he knows, he can see the writing on the wall, that the minute that the exports start to dry up, and the minute that, and people are talking about moving exports and moving manufacturing bases to Vietnam, to India, of course, moving back. Of course, President Trump has campaigned for 40 years about bringing manufacturing back to the United States. That has been his number one, for everything else that he said. I'm not speaking as a Trump supporter right now. I'm just speaking in terms of an analyst, but that obviously has been Donald Trump's singular focus for his campaign, very, very, very long time. And so they're trying to galvanize a new red guard in China. Remember the little red books? I wouldn't be surprised if Xi Jinping has something similar coming out soon. Because the slogan of the Boxers, the Yihetuan, early on, was restore Qing dynasty, so restore Qing and eradicate the foreigners. Fu Qing Nie Yang. And actually, yang was the word they used for foreigners. So yang in Chinese in this sense means ocean. So you were the foreigners because you came from the ocean. Get it? So you're the foreigners. So Fu Qing, right? Restore Qing. Fu Qing, restore Qing. Nie Yang, exterminate, eradicate the foreigners. And that is the same type. And so what Xi Jinping is doing is he's simply cutting out the middleman. He says, forget, I can see where this is going. And I see what we need to do. I can see that our foreign relationships are deteriorating. I can see that our debt crisis this bubble is about to explode. So his only thought to preserve his regime's legitimacy. Keep in mind, that's what this is about for the CCP, preserving the dynasty, right? It's, he's not worried about the economics. He's not worried about his international image anymore. They're done. And yes, the Qing dynasty was Manchu, but that's a completely separate topic. We're trying not to get too much into the details here, about the specifics of the Qing dynasty and the Mandarins and the Manchus and how it all worked, etc. But the goal of this is for an audience of people that have never heard about this stuff before and are seeing all these headlines and trying to make sense of all of it, try to figure out what the heck is going on. Exactly. Xi is worried about himself, and he's worried about the longevity of the party, the preservation of the regime itself. But I will tell you this, folks, that the Boxer Rebellion was too little too late. It was too much too late, essentially. 我是结合，我会说中文的。And that ended up leading to the end of the Qing dynasty and the foundation. They attempted to start a Republic of China. That, of course, went into Taiwan. We covered that on Monday, or I guess Tuesday. In episode 1, we covered that, so go back and watch that. And then in 1949, following the events of World War II, at the end of the Chinese Civil War, they established the People's Republic of China. So that was the communist occupation. So you really have to understand, in the span of 50 years, China went from, and we are seeing China enter a new cycle of dynastic decline, decay, and replacement. The Opium War, the loss of the Opium War, was the catalyst for the end of the last dynasty. It may very well be that Wuhan coronavirus is the catalyst for the end of this dynasty. And that's also why we refer to it as China's Chernobyl. 我知道我是对的，当然知道了。And so in the time span of 1899, when the Boxer Rebellion took off, you have to think about everything that happens to China. So 1899 Boxer Rebellion happens. Qing dynasty is in its death throes. By 1911, Qing dynasty is gone. Republic of China is set up. But then in the 1930s, Japan invades because Japan sees that China is still weak, and they attempt to impose their will because Japan was strong. Remember, Japan had industrialized at this point. China had yet to industrialize, even though China was much bigger. Then following the war, the Soviet Union gets behind Chairman Mao, the Red Army. So following 1945, right, we're in 1945 now. The Red Army gets the support of the Soviets. The nationalists, the Kuomintang or KMT, do not get the support of Truman that they need. They do not. So Chiang Kai-shek, also known as Jiang Jieshi in Mandarin, flees to Taiwan. That sets up Taiwan where it is. And then in 1949, Chairman Mao goes to the gate of heaven, Tiananmen. So he goes to Tiananmen and he makes this great declaration, this famous declaration in Chinese. 中国人民终于站起来了. It's my Chairman Mao impression. 中国人民终于站起来了. And what that means is the Chinese people have finally stood up. Of course, Chairman Mao has a Hunan accent. He didn't actually speak Mandarin very well, which is based off of the Beijing accent, and so his accent is a little bit hard to do. So, 中华人民终于站起来了. He had this sort of like raspy voice. But what that meant was the Chinese people have finally stood up. What do I mean by that? Go back. Chairman Mao is referring to the events of the past 50 years. Now, I can't speak Cantonese. I can speak a little bit of Shanghainese because that's the city I lived in. So, Wazasahini. Allah Wazasahini. Uzasahini. Uzasahini. Allah Wazasahini. You are not Shanghainese. I'm Shanghainese. So, Chairman Mao is referring to the events of the past 50 years, from the Boxer Rebellion to the start of the new dynasty. That is what he meant by the Chinese people have finally stood up. And so the question then becomes, will the Chinese people stand up again against the CCP to form a new regime, a new government in China? Now, from the Boxer Rebellion through the establishment of the Republic of China, it was only about 10 years. It was only about 10 years, by the way. And had the Japanese not invaded, and had World War II not have come to pass, then it's possible that the Republic of China would have been able to expand and really maintain legitimacy across all of China. In fact, the Republic of China, if you talk to the Taiwanese now, they still maintain that they hold sovereignty over all of China and Mongolia, because at that point, Mongolia was part of China. It's a long story. Soviets wanted a buffer zone. And so the reason you're seeing Xi act the way he's acting is that he is now in the position of the Qing dynasty in 1899. And he doesn't see any other way out. So the idea that he's looking at now is to cut off ties with the foreign world, circle the wagons, and hope and pray that he's able to wait it out and that it's able to preserve the regime. Will he be able to do so? I don't know. Will he order military action in the South China Sea or Taiwan in order to preserve his own regime? Hard to say. But you have to understand that he is now looking at regime preservation because he's faced with one choice or the other: regime collapse or regime preservation. And we know which road he wants to take. And what choices he makes along that road, I think, will have a very, very direct effect and impact on not only the people of Hong Kong, the people of Taiwan, the people of China themselves, who of course are the direct victims of the Chinese Communist Party, tens of millions, but also the rest of us. Because as we look at the world, understand that China has been really enforcing their space program, their satellite program. China wants to get to the moon. China wants to establish bases on the moon. Is the United States going to do anything in response to that, or are we just going to let them? Is the United States going to allow China to take over the moon the way they took over the South China Sea? Look what they did to the South China Sea. And the United States stood by and watched. They, filed some angry letters and some complaints and sent some warships nearby. We watched them build, and we shook our fists in anger. And now China has their sights set on the moon. Should the United States allow them to just take it the way look at Greenland. China controls more of Greenland than the United States right now. Did you know that? They do. They absolutely do. So that's the question we're in, and that's the analysis. And I haven't quite figured out a topic yet for next episode, for tomorrow's episode. But it'll be good. Someone just said Elon Musk. No, Elon Musk is a con man. Come on, guys. Stop. Please stop. What about Macau? Macau is the Las Vegas of China. No, this is, if we are going to do anything about China, it has to be a whole of society approach. It can't be Elon Musk, right? No, come on. No, this is the United States of America. And the United States of America is bigger than one person. It's certainly bigger than one president, and it's certainly bigger than one political party. Should Taiwan regain sovereignty over the rest of China? Should Taiwan declare solidarity with the Hong Kong protesters? We will see. We'll see, folks. Many options. As Master Yoda says, always in motion, the future is. But I got to run. A lot to do here. So if you haven't watched episodes 1 and 2 yet, please go do so. This is episode 3. I'm going to put out a sequential thread where you can watch all of them. I'm going to make sure these are also uploaded to YouTube and everywhere else you can find podcasts. And I I appreciate you guys watching these. I appreciate the support. I appreciate you guys sharing them out. India, would like to talk about India. That is a really good angle here because India is a huge wild card. So you get into India, Pakistan, and how that relates to China, how that relates to Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. Of course, I do want to talk about the Uyghurs. So perhaps that's an interesting topic as well because that's a vector that we haven't really broached yet. But the million Uyghurs that China has in concentration camps, and why is Uyghur separatism so important of a direct threat to the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party? We'll see. We will see. But for now, I must go. So I appreciate you again watching. My name is Jack Posobiec. I'm a China analyst, longtime China analyst, 15 years. I was a Mandarin linguist in the United States Navy and the intelligence community. And that is how I learned quite a bit about the region. I also spent 2 years living and working in Shanghai. First started at the American Chamber of Commerce, then was working in the international business community there. And I've traveled extensively throughout China. I've traveled to Xinjiang. I've traveled to Tibet. I've traveled all throughout inland China. I've traveled to pretty much every major city. Never went to Wuhan. I don't know that I would go there now. And certainly not with family. And I've been to Hong Kong many times. I've been to Taiwan. I love Hong Kong. I love the city. It is, as far as cities go, it may be one of my favorite cities on the planet. And it's very sad what's going on there right now. So, my heart goes out to just on a personal level, my heart goes out to Hong Kong. And so thank you very much. My name again is Jack Posobiec, and keep watching the series. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, you have my permission to lay ashore.